it though.
Oh,
It's live in this room, it definitely works.
Is it?
Guest, capital G.
Yes, other networks.
Can you mind if I just,
Yes, capital G.
can you mind if I just ask a quick question? So I've been familiar with Kashengo at all. In seeing your demo, I just saw you had the two different options between GPTs and things like that. What is Kashengo as a product? Is it just the LLM that then you have access to, or
Oh, I don't know.
is it just the LLM that you have access to that is specifically
So
trained?
Kashengo, yeah. So Kashengo is a decentralized cloud. So we work with a number of different operators. So we have nodes all over the world, and so it's kind of think of them as ephemeral nodes that can be generated anywhere.
Sure.
And so we work with a lot of enterprise who like to put a lot of stuff at the edge.
Sure.
So like CDN
So like
providers.
Cloudflare is offering kind of.
Yeah. In fact, very similar, except the difference is like Cloudflare sets up their own data centers.
Yeah.
So what we do is we set up a whole kind of, we use all the static routes. So if you want to write everything privately, I think that'll be important. I think as we head into the next gen of AI, data privacy, I think is going to be a real issue. Everybody talks about data sovereignty. My own view is cyber security, I think, exists because of public DNS and public BGP. And so it's kind of back to the future. I think I see some people with the gray hair like me, so I think it'll be back to the future where you'll just move it off the internet.
Yeah.
And I think that becomes a very practical way, but I think it has to have a lot of, I'd say, more software-friendly tools. So part of what our MCP will do too is if you want to route everything over static routes or off the network, off the internet side of things, you can do that as well. But it will be done through orchestration as opposed to somebody who has to say, I need to connect these cables together or I need the static IP addresses. So it'll work from that perspective. Okay, I'm doing the email register.
Yeah, so while he's doing that, we'll just basically talk a couple of things here just on the Kashengo side. So at the very far edge, where we have real world data, we got products like this. 3 inches, 7.62 centimeters. It has just about, if the wind's behind us and we do this right, we'll have 10, 11 tops out of this thing. We have 512 gigs of storage, up to 2 terabytes of storage on these devices. Storing forward could be a CDN, could also do AI inferencing at the edge, far edge. As far as speed goes, we can get up to microseconds. So as data being created, feeds right in here, you can cache on out. Once again, this is not production, this is our POC, and we do have it in test out there. Then the next thing is the subset. All of our infrastructure is built in step. Same software base, same APIs, same SDKs across it. We go to the next size where we get to something, I guess, lack of better, we call it a symbiote. Where you might see like a Raspberry Pi, but it's not a Raspberry Pi. It has a lot more horsepower behind it, and that's really small too. It's about the size of a Raspberry Pi. But we can get our next building block is this thing called a bento, and think of that as 8 of them together going into a layer 2 switch that then has 2 10 gig networks. We have a pizza beyond that. The pizza does 32. So you have 32. From there we go to the next step up. The next step up, we do a rack. In the rack we do 640 of them, or we do 1080 coming up next fall where we have a deeper one. So very high density. Yes, there's questions.
And are these individual components that we could purchase and consume, or are these just components that you have and you distribute throughout data centers across the world that we consume?
That is why we're here today.
Okay.
So we're here today trying to figure out where it's working. We've been super successful in deploying these out. We have just about low end, 25,000 conservatively out into the wild. Here in Europe, we actually have a large customer who's requesting 10,000 that we'll be doing next year. The big challenge here, I've been doing, if you look at my hairline, I've been doing this for quite some time, right? Symbiotics, yeah. Managing under scale. So there's 2 ways of doing it. One side of the coin, right, is getting bigger servers and virtualizing the hell of them, slicing them on up. But we had a different approach because we're down at the edge. We have lots of small servers that we're able to virtualize and bring together to simulate largers. So when you start managing, I led software at Lenovo prior to joining here. I also was a veteran at VMware, VPGM, and did all innovation over there in Palo Alto. At scale, the enterprise with the wind behind it, Walmart's, Home Depot, General Motors, you know, the network management infrastructure is in the low tens, 15,000 at the most. And all of a sudden, when you start talking about these, it's the antithesis of it. We're having to manage 50,000, 100,000 out there, and that becomes a lot more weighting. So with that being said, we're doing a managed service to begin with, so we can guarantee that SLA. It's all about brand, to be transparent to you, especially as a startup. So we want to make sure we have security and high uptime. Down the road, to your point, when we have stability in software, or more importantly, we can go to the open source community and then leverage all the great stuff that you guys are doing in OpenStack and the network management stuff. Then at that junction, we're thinking maybe some other venues. Yes.
Do you need any beta testers?
We're good. 1 second. First of all, the word is
You do.
watch this. The word is yes.
Okay.
Mostly, we need both beta testers and we need innovators. We don't wake up in the morning knowing all the answers. We don't. You know, we have good vision, we have great dialogue going, but we are a big believer that a village is the best way to raise this. And so that's why we're 100%, you know, open source. We do everything we do.
It's basically how we got Linux adoption originally.
Exactly right.
That was, I kept my hair, but it turned white. So, you know, originally we did the same type of thing with large financial institutions. You know, we partnered with Red. At that point in time, I partnered with Red Hat. I partnered with some others to get Linux accepted into Oracle. We ran the first Oracle database on Linux. We ran the first Oracle financials on Linux. We ran the first, you know, banking financial institution on Linux.
So
that's our pedigrees.
So the net, the word is yes, right? Anybody wants to be a test set. We currently have quite a few virtualized. This, for this show alone, we turned up 1,000 servers. So with 1,000 servers, to be honest with you, I have another 4,000 in my pocket right now. So if this thing did blow up tonight, tomorrow, I could throw 4,000 at you guys to go play with this stuff. The MCP server, when you see this QR code, go play with it, test it, bang on it, let us know, because that's one of the reasons why we're out here. You guys and ladies are very important to us. And we
Try not to rootkit it, we'd appreciate it.
Exactly. So he's coming on up. Any more questions? I feel like I'm just talking, everybody's listening, but it's okay.
I don't mind the attention.
Any more questions or comments? Okay, you ready?
All right, I'm gonna try
All yours.
this. I've had to resort to using my 5G on my phone, so if this actually works, you guys should be impressed, so. So, I appreciate it. It sounds like a lot of people came to yesterday's session, so, you know, our view, I think we've all seen in science fiction, where the LLMs are essentially talking to compute. And so we really think that the next big challenge for DevStacks is to get to the other side of that. So that's really what we are looking at and did introduce yesterday. And so what we've done is we've come up with an MCP, that think of it as MCP for orchestration. So if you heard part of what Mike and Steve were talking about, we have a whole cloud infrastructure. So we made 1,000 nodes available. So if you haven't tried it, I will give you the QR code here today, but you can try it. We have the nodes available. And we have an MCP that essentially directly lets you provision those nodes right into your interwall lab. So right now, if you're using Claude or if you're using ChatGPT, you have this very limited sandbox. If you are, it sounds like everybody here is a relatively interesting person, at least on the compute side. So if you want to do port scans, if you want to do some other stuff, you can't really do those in those sandboxes. Well, now you have a compute environment that kind of lets you do all those sorts of things. And what we really wanted to do, and it was funny because we had our own internal inspirational talk, of course, and we talked about these things. And so we want to make an MCP that lets you not only build an MCP, but deploy it. And so what was funny is one of our devs was working over the weekend, and he's like, I wanted the LLM to make a playlist for me on Spotify. And he goes, but they didn't have an MCP. And he goes, oh, but they have an API. So he used this tool to make an MCP for Spotify that could make his playlist. What was great was like, well, how long did it take? He goes, no, about 10 minutes. And so I thought that was awesome. And after the talk yesterday, a number of people said, hey, we've been trying to deploy MCPs. And as everybody here knows, there's so much work just on the operational side of things. And as we've been talking, every time we talk to everybody in the AI space, they're just like, no, speed. We want to get to a lot of things. And we said, oh, so like with the compute nodes, we realized people don't want a compute node. They want 10. And they want to be able to say, oh, I want to run these 10 experiments. Will you do that for me? And that's been the interesting thing for us that we found is that everybody's pretty smart. But the interesting thing that I hear a lot of feedback on is, I don't want to learn anything though, in the sense that I don't want to learn how to deploy this. I don't want to learn this. I got an idea and I got to realize that. And what I think that's very interesting about LLMs is that they're pretty good at that. They're, especially in the open source community, because there's a lot of stuff to train from. So they're really good at, oh, look, I think you need this package. And they do those packages for you. And so it really eliminates the time. And that's where we're really starting to see a lot of interesting evolution in this whole thing. So again, if you want, there's 1,000 nodes available. You can literally try this stuff out. There's a ChatGPT extension, because unless you have paid ChatGPT, then you can do the MCP interface. And then for Claude, there's an MCP for it, and it'll work. You can generate the nodes directly. Everything kind of works in that space. So now I'm a little nervous, because every time I try this in 5G, it's never great, but I'm trying to do everything. Let's see. Just, that will do it.
Nice and slow.
Test it real time. So, the way it works too is, you probably noticed that the URL says no BGP. So I was jokingly talking about BGP being a big source of cyber attacks. So we do all the routing as well. And so again, if you happen to have a cloud infrastructure on premise, maybe if you have some Raspberry Pis that you're doing some testing on, you can wire all those things together, and it gets deterministically routed. So you could set up a router at AWS, you could set up a router wherever on your premise, and you can have everything centrally routed through that. And it's all done through orchestration, so it works that way. Let's see. It's not working. Let me dump through this. I'm gonna try a real world test. So what I'm doing here is I'm literally just asking the LLM to list my nodes. So what it's doing is it's detecting all the nodes that I've already got set up. And it's doing the network discovery for that. And again, one of the things you'll see here is you'll see nodes that I have at AWS, and Shango, and I think I have some local nodes as well. And I'll just discover all those. But I think the more important thing that I did show yesterday, which I'll show again just real quickly, is I will just say, can you essentially deploy a new node? Call it demo 2. And so what happens is, since I've already got it connected to my infrastructure, it'll just deploy one of the nodes. So if you do try that QR code, you'll get one of these nodes that we've already got pre-provisioned. It'll set it up. You'll get a reasonable 4 CPU, 4 gig instance that you can start playing with. And it is just a full node. Let's see. Can you give me a public web terminal? And what this will do is, we have just a web terminal interface. It's root access. If you did see my presentation yesterday, I literally have root access to something. It didn't blow up, so my server is actually still up, so I don't think anybody actually tried to get into that. But if you connect to it, it'll just give you an idea of what it looks like.
Have you defined like what project that this would download, or does it just assume from the LM it looks in GitHub and we'll choose a random project to install and configure?
Oh, then you can do exactly that. So this just sets up a Linux instance and Ubuntu instance, I think, in this particular case. Mm-hmm. And so this is just the shell commands. But as an example, so like this is what I did yesterday. I just did like an nginx instance. But let's get a little bit braver today, because I promised to do that. So, here's an MCP. This is a chat session logger. Again, very relevant if you're going to do your own sandbox. So you want to be able to store all your sandbox sessions. So, oops. So what will happen here, and again, this gets into, I think, some of the interesting stuff about the LLM being pretty smart. I'm just grabbing whatever GitHub project I want. So if you wanted to use like fast MCP or something to build up a MCP framework, you could do that and then decide how you want to do that. It will look for it, it'll figure it out, then it will audit the node itself, and then figure out what's missing. I think it'll say it needs Node.js in this particular case, so we'll go ahead and install it for you. And so this is where I think the LLM becomes kind of your partner in that sense, because you don't have to figure that piece out. Or if you have, like I was experimenting with a little vibe coding, you have to sit in the middle, so you don't have to do that, because the LLM has control for that.
Well, obviously you presented to engineers because of the nature of the conference. When I saw this yesterday, the thing that came to my mind was ServiceNow. You know, this at the back of the service catalog or something like that. Just direct kind of client-facing solutions. Is that something you're...
I think you're really pointing out a lot of more use cases that we're starting to see. I think...
Because we always inject ourselves because of our ego, but, you know, obviously, as you said, or I alluded to it before, this it removes the requirement.
Yeah, I'll mean share those use cases. I mean, we're part of the open source community. We're looking for that type of feedback.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what we're starting to see. I mean, I think the biggest thing, by the way, we're recording some podcasts out here, so if anybody's interested in speaking to that, just let us know. We're happy to have you on. Well, I think the thing that's interesting with LLMs is it really is reinventing the whole UX experience. Because everybody has a slightly different UX experience that they're expecting, and people are kind of guessing at what that is. With the LLM, they get to tell you what they want. And then it just trains itself, and it really has a big, big impact on all that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I worked at Deutsche Bank for a number of years, and we did a lot of bot development and integrated with Symphony. But, you know, at the end of the day, it wasn't an LLM. So, you know, you had a canned responses out of maybe one of 500 choices. Or maybe somehow integrated with an API, but you know this is well beyond that, right? So in terms of the interface, it hasn't changed, but in terms of the output and the capability, that's very different.
Well, that's the thing, and again, that's why I brought up the example that our dev used. It's like there's lots of APIs out there now, and it's extraordinarily amazing how much faster the LLM is figuring out how to make that work.
Yeah.
And that's been the fascinating thing.
Well, and putting the APIs directly in the hands of the end user, the business user, and not the engineer.
Yes, because the use cases are so different. You talked about like ServiceNow, but we're starting to see in other industries as well, where they're just like, I mean, literally like fashion industry, they're just like, hey, wait a minute, you mean I can just ask? And I'm like, yeah, you might need an account there. And so like, things that we're starting to find is like, we have to put a lot of energy in single sign-on and authentication and those sorts of things, because these are very non-technical people. And so they, you know what they love? Google signed it. They're like, oh wait, I need to access this, and if I give you my Google sign, then I can do that. Forget the security implications of that, but it really, well, and I think these are the challenges that I think are really practical that everybody faces. I mean, I've been on plenty of security panels and everything, and I can talk a lot about the intellectual part, but the truth is, once it's out in the wild, you're not quite sure what's actually going to happen out there. And I've been amazed. I have a lot of friends that are very non-tech, and their use of AI far exceeds anybody I know in tech. Everybody in tech has their own guardrails up. You go talk to somebody, like a friend of mine is a stylist, and he like tours with B-52s and the Go-Go's and everything. He uses it to run his whole life. You know, and he figures out how it will, like, he needed to get certification in New York or something, and AI figured out that if he, because California and New York don't have reciprocal arrangements. But he goes, if I just registered in North Carolina, because North Carolina, AI figured it out for him and solved the problem. And so it's been amazing to me what I've seen from the non-technical people. But what's interesting is they're jumping into the technical space.
Well, they're the ones with the problems. You know, engineers have the solutions, but they don't ask the right questions.
They don't have the user case, the user experience. One thing I'll mention about touching on the subject of security and also data sovereignty, which is the question I've 65 times today already. The LLM that he's currently using is a public LLM, but that doesn't have to be that way. If you want to run a private, on my laptop I've got a demo of a private LLM that runs on my piece up here. I can drop any documents, any kind of stories I need into it, and then you can use your own base if you're working for, God forbid, Deutsche Bank. Been there, done that. Or you just want to keep your data private, right? You're being allocated a server that's yours, right? We're not Amazon. We don't scrape your data. We don't do any of that kind of crap. If you want to have your own LLM, and feed this and have the same power at your disposal or at your discretion. It's your data, encrypted, secure on the device. You can use that to drive the information base.
Yeah, one thing's for certain, we woke up and we thought this was really development focused. We really did.
Yeah.
We turned this thing loose last night. I got an intern who came back to me who I mentored. She's now doing data analytics for social media and she's bagging into Grafana. She did it overnight. I got another guy who has nothing to do with this and he's turning around and using his accounting platform, and he's a small PC business that he went back to spin out. So the use cases have changed so quickly in 24 hours than what we wake up in the morning thinking. We just thought it was strictly development focused.
Sorry.
So
I was like, if you just look at this and we were just following what was happening, and so the good news is like these are the typical things you run into. You had a problem, they figured out what was the problem, they redid it. And again, the thing that's been interesting, kind of alluding to what Mike said, is that we found out that people pretty quickly realized that they can provision more than one unit. And so then they started trying different things. And we're like, that's great, but like we were talking internally about how the nodes get used. And I said, no, we just have to give credits because people aren't going to use one node serially. They're just going to buy a bunch of credits and say, if I can move faster by using 10 or 20 or 100 in parallel, especially with how people are starting to use agents and everything in this particular case, we think that's kind of the different way that things are going to get approached going forward.
that's where we're seeing a dogfooding for internal. So we're seeing our internal people following exactly that methodology. They're just trying 10 different paths to find out which way they're doing. They're actually doing digital twins and then falling back that way.
Yeah. So you can see it's like at least got to the node, you got to the web terminal, but it's now trying to finish up the next steps. So.
I'm sorry, you ripped another question.
Sorry, yeah, my mind is just racing actually. I find this very interesting, but obviously the size of the design, some of your devices are so small. We're all thinking about enterprise applications that actually lends itself to consumer applications. I mean, the reality is you have such a sophisticated capability that's smaller than an Alexa,
Right.
and these things could go in every home, in every house, and in every car. So the reality is, I think.
From your lips to God's ears.
Yeah, I mean, so.
Exactly.
So the good news is we have packages running on everything from a Pi to an H100 to a B100 now, exactly sort of in that space, so that you can kind of give the whole range of capabilities. So, because I think to your point, but I think the next step really will be that the LLM will start deciding. They'll say, hey, we noticed you have an account here. This would be the fastest way, or they can start coming back to you with different approaches depending on what you want to be able to do. And I think that's a completely reasonable way.
Well, and as people put more trust in these kinds of things, and as automation infiltrates the everyday household, when you talk about privacy, again, there's the corporate angle, but people are going to want to start to run these things themselves and protect their data in their everyday lives more than they are necessarily at work. Yeah.
So our developments are actually scaling up. So they run 10. It's interesting how they use it. They actually, after they develop a module, test the module, they're actually now going to each of them, comparing the analytics across how much packets were in GPU pack. So now it's allowing them to and now they have another management system on top of that, just seeing which path they want to do. And then it's still done in 2 or 3 directions and then eventually on that path.
Well, everybody's here. I will show, this is the page that QR code will go to, but it has, a number of example MCPs. It even does like a broken link checker. I don't know if anybody's ever had any problems with like email setup, but I think we have a setup for email server checkers too. They'll check your settings and everything. But again, it's the typical things that might be a fun project over a weekend, but now you don't have to burn a lot of weekend time doing it. You can just kind of build it.
You don't have to Google it and then try to follow the instructions.
You don't have to Google it and try to find the instructions. You could just ask the LLM. And again, I think in this particular case, especially for a lot of open source projects, we were talking to Sean, and data integrity really matters for the training thing. And so when you have a lot of good repos out there, it really makes a difference. And kind of to what Steve was alluding to, we work with a lot of companies who have a lot of private repos, things like microcode and everything. All of a sudden now you have this, and it changes the way that people are able to use this stuff pretty quickly. Because you don't have to learn, like I said, people, I give a little tangential story, but I was incubating this robotics startup. So this is typical Silicon Valley, so you guys will appreciate the Silicon Valley story. This kid shows up, and he's like, hey, I want to rent this house. And I said, okay. And he goes, but I don't know if everybody probably knows who Y Combinator is, and so they're a big incubator in the Valley. And I'm like, okay, well, I know he has $500,000. He gets $500,000 to check. And I said, okay, I'll rent you the place. A week later, another kid shows up and goes, I'm Ben's co-founder. And so I was like, okay, and then 3 weeks later, a kid from Poland shows up, so I'm the third co-founder. So they're doing a robotics startup. So they're out of Meta and Tesla's AI group. About 4 weeks later, they're like, hey, we want to do an open house. So I had to move all the cars out and everything. I'm like, how'd it go? I'm like, oh, we raised $4 million, on a, I think, a $40 million valuation. They just got an order, they're selling robots for, I think, $10,000. I think they just sold 1,000 of those. But what was interesting is I'm a networking guy. So my first startup did TCP/IP in silicon. So I was very fortunate. A company called NVIDIA bought that one. So I'm talking to them about how these robots need to communicate across the internet. And literally Ben, the founder, goes, Ryo, we're not interested in learning any of that. He goes, can you give us an API for that? And I think the world has changed a lot in terms of how they want to approach these things, because they don't care about making it, and it is a very different approach.
I think it's building on the shoulders of giants. I mean, I run our cloud teams, and we're hiring people all the time that have so much experience in AWS or Azure, they don't know how Linux works. Yes. So, it's very awkward as a manager to try to wrap yourself around that kind of mindset. So we see that all day, every day, and this is no different.
Yeah, I think it's no different, and it is amazing though how quickly people have adopted the LLM approach, and that is the learning. It's like, we were, again, when we were just talking to Sean, it's like we were joking that hallucinations are only hallucinations if you know. If you don't know, it's actually the truth. And so it's a little bit challenging in that space, and so there's some challenges but again, at least from what we've seen so far, what's been great about this is it's very narrow in the sense that it takes advantage of APIs. It's much better at auditing the APIs. It's better at understanding those themes. If you're going to take different code packages or even ask it to build me the best MCP server, it'll pick the right package for the MCP that we want to be able to do. And so we found it to be a pretty interesting exercise. And what I can tell you is I've got 2 devs that I've worked closely with throughout my career, and they are never agree. But what's been fascinating with this is, well, actually what was fascinating is they both came to me and said, he didn't get it until I got him to use it 2 weeks ago. They literally told me the same thing. And they were like, now he's super excited about it. And so that's been enthusiastic from our side, and that's what we thought, very, very developer friendly. But what's been interesting is that as we've gotten out to a few more people, it's been very different. And people who are not techie at all, but then also people who are very techie, but they don't necessarily want to learn the different platforms, but they know they need to deploy on this. This gives them another tool to be able to do those sorts of things.
Any feedback, guys? I mean, I just really appreciate any comments. Yeah.
Yeah, quick question. So there are huge amounts of trust in all of these kind of scenarios that you're describing right now. Like obviously the guys with the robotics are trusting your this API that it builds for them to not have any security because it like holes or whatever. When it comes to hallucinations, you need to trust that what you can kind of confirm on your own that this is correct, etc. Obviously, there's a lot of productivity and that goes along with that kind of optimism. But I can imagine, especially as an American company right now, trying to perhaps do business in Europe, that there is a little bit of friction.
There's definitely friction, and for kind of what was alluded to before, I mean, number one, the public LLMs are not really trusted, and so going to private LLMs really matters. Also, in terms of the MCP, it can be self-deployed, which I think is going to be very important for, frankly, any enterprise company. And so I think those things are going to matter. So we've really tried to package it that way, so it works that way. Again, I mean, we are a business. We are going to try to make money because it's really important. But I'll be honest, this is kind of cool. Like, this is like, it's like, we joked about the SkyNet thing, but it's kind of cool. It's like I said, it's funny because
guy has a SkyNet t-shirt on.
Yes, I know. I had to take a selfie. But I was I was at a Silicon Valley dinner party, and that was the big debate, the moral dilemma of LLM and compute. And I was like, you have to get there, because we have to get to the other side. And so when we got this done, it was like, wow, this is actually kind of cool. Like I said, I mentioned, we're going to do a Pi package just because I know I've got like 5 Pi sitting in a closet. But if I plugged them in my house, and I could just access them from Claude anytime I want, it kind of changes how I'm gonna use those. And I think that's what's exciting about this is, if it is, like I said, I don't know anybody who's seen Star Trek 4, but I joked about putting that clip on there when Scotty grabbed a mouse and started saying, "Computer, do this for me." But I kind of, for me, that's what's exciting, because every time I have to think about connecting a computer or like bringing up an EC2 instance, I stop everything. But the minute I'm sitting there anyway and say, "Oh, can you do this for me?" And if I've got a bank of credits, or if I've got a Pi sitting there, or if I've got a computer at my house and it will just do it for me, it's like, it game changes everything. And so I think it's definitely hopefully it's a new world order that's happening. Because I think we all know what's going to happen. And so I think this is the first step towards that. But I think to your point, the deployment will be very, very different on how it goes. And just trying to be thoughtful.
It's just one additional component to what you're saying. You heard yesterday about sovereignty and resilience. Theory did a great job. Like I said, the most often question I've been working on today. But that my comment I made earlier about you could have a private LLM, you can have everything with your own data. As we've learned with containers, right? I just grabbed something off the Docker Hub. It's probably safe, right? Not so much. But the alternative here is if we embrace the philosophy of open source and all of what we do, then that LLM can be, come from a trusted source, be compiled from a trusted source in your own, if that's the way you want to do it. Not all of us run our own kernels anymore. But also the MCP component. So every component in that chain, well, what we're fantasizing probably is a better word than hypothesizing. But fantasizing is that you would literally be in control of your data and of your thought process all the way from stem to stern. It doesn't go to a big cloud, it doesn't get your analytics scraped. It's all, literally, in our case, we sell hardware, we are trying to feed our kids. But it's processed on your own gear, in your own home, in your own resources. So that philosophy plays through, that open source philosophy plays through all the way through. And that's kind of at the core of what we're about. We like that approach.
And especially even just if you think about training and fine-tuning and inferencing today, a lot of the workload problems are not the GPUs, ironically. It's CPU bandwidth to be able to kind of pipeline everything. And I think those are the areas where a lot of the models are going to start to get trained. And it's going to look a lot different than what it looks like today. Because people sit there and say it's the GPU farms that are lacking. I know 2 data centers that have H100s that are fully unoccupied right now. And so that's not the problem. And so I think the LLMs are going to get much smarter about how to use resources. And so the challenge for us as an industry is to make sure that the LLMs can easily get those resources. Because right now, if you have to have just a bunch of DevOps people and a bunch of network engineers, it's never going to happen. But if you can plumb it that way, it becomes very easy. And the way we've tried to design this is if you have AWS, if you have Azure, if you were using our infrastructure, you can just use one MCP to orchestrate all those bits. And I think that will just matter. And to your point, our challenge is to make sure that you feel completely comfortable that it is sovereign to you. And I think that's why I appreciate data sovereignty, I appreciate all these terminologies, but you know what really matters? You feel comfortable with what it is. And so I always think it's personal sovereignty that really matters in that case.
We'll be adding both NVIDIA and Gaudis to this infrastructure to make it available. And we have SANs as well available, more storage, and you just release them and get rid of them and erase them when we're done. You'll control your own destiny. So we have a timer on it, we have a scheduler. And when we see it idle, we wipe it clean.
And so if you get nothing else out of this, remember this is the start of SkyNet. So we're from the future. This is when Terminator started. That's why he showed up with a t-shirt. That's why he showed up with a t-shirt to prove that that's true. But like I said, we're around. Like I said, I hope everybody tries it. Because what I will say is, even for myself, but definitely for everybody on our dev team, until they tried it, they had a perception of it, and it completely changed once they started trying it. And that's why when we joked about the 1,000, it's kind of unencumbered right now, but we're like, no, that's what people want. It's like, I just need another one. I just need another one. And And so we just left it that way on purpose, because it's like, we want that experience, because I think that is the experience. It'll get kept by whoever the admin is at some point for each company, but I think that's sort of the experience that we think it's gonna be for us.
We're gonna do a couple hackathons coming up, by the way, so just play with it and get some themes, so we'll get back. That's our next thing we'll work on. And then timelines, November 1st is one gate, and December 1st, probably complete GA on January 1. That's what we'll do.
Like I said, we're doing podcasts out there, so if you design an MCP and you want to come on the podcast tomorrow,
I would love that.
tell us the MCP that you've made. We seriously would love that, so.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, thank you. We'll be out here if you want to talk.